Hi, everyone, and welcome to the AI Experience News Roundup. Julian read everything so you don't have to, and I'm here to bring you the most relevant AI stories you probably haven't seen, all in under 10 minutes. Let's dive in.
If you think about what happened from GPT-3 to 3.5 to 4, it just got smarter.
The field became known as artificial intelligence.
Can machines really think?
What if the meeting you hate is actually one of the things still protecting your job? In an article for the New York Times, Noam Scheiber describes a scene that captures one of the big paradoxes of AI at work. AI can make production much faster, but it does not remove human friction. The article starts with the example of a fractional chief marketing officer who already works for two companies at the same time. Thanks to Claude, Gemini, and ChatGPT, he can produce work much faster. A website that used to take 3 to 6 months can now be built in about 1 month. A messaging strategy that used to take a week can now be written in less than 8 hours. As a result, he is considering working for a third company. But not more than that. Why? Because of human relationships. And, very simply, because of meetings. The article shows that AI can automate or speed up part of knowledge work. Writing memos, creating strategic options, building prototypes, writing code, and preparing presentations. But once all that exists, someone still has to convince people, make decisions, reassure teams, negotiate, align stakeholders, or get a client to sign. The more AI increases the amount of content, ideas, and analysis available, the more valuable it becomes to create meaning, tell a clear story, persuade others, and build trust. The article quotes David Deming, an economist and the dean of Harvard College. He explains that social skills were already important, but in a world filled with more and more information, the ability to turn a large amount of text into a clear and useful story becomes even more valuable, and we can see this across several jobs. At a software company, a data scientist explains that AI now writes part of the code and runs the analysis. So hiring is becoming less focused on coding alone and more focused on whether someone can identify good ideas and convince others to support them. At KPMG, AI is reducing the value of some narrow technical expertise and increasing the value of people who take initiative, understand clients, and build relationships. The same logic appears at Salesforce. AI speeds up execution, but clients still want to talk to human beings. They want reassurance. They want to ask questions. They want to feel that someone understands their situation. AI does not only replace tasks, it changes where value sits in work. In that world, meetings and human contact can still make the difference. What if Bollywood's next competitor is not another studio but a laptop in a village? In an article from Le Monde, one of France's leading newspapers, similar in status to the New York Times in North America, the paper reports on a first for Indian cinema, the theatrical release planned for the end of summer 2026 of Maharaja in Denims. The film is presented as the first feature film entirely generated by artificial intelligence except for its soundtrack. The main point is not only that a movie was created with AI, it is that AI is starting to touch the most concrete parts of filmmaking: actors, sets, directing, costs, timelines, and the whole organization of production. The film is based on a novel. It tells the story of a teenager who believes he is the reincarnation of a Maharaja, the founder of the Sikh Empire in the 19th century. It is an ambitious historical story with strong visual demands. In a traditional production model, filmmakers had estimated the cost at more than 500 million rupees. With AI, the film is expected to cost between 40 and 50 million rupees. So AI is changing the economics of filmmaking. No actor fees, no delayed shoots, no physical sets to build. A small team of 6 people can produce something that would normally require much heavier resources. But the article also shows the limits of this promise. Today's AI tools are still not well trained to reproduce Indian faces. The director even says it would have been easier to make a Western because AI models and references are still heavily centered on Western culture. Another challenge is speed. The technology changes so fast that images created a few months earlier can quickly look less convincing. The film, first expected by the end of 2025, has therefore been delayed. On one side, AI clearly opens the door to cheaper and more accessible productions. On the other, it does not remove artistic difficulty. It creates new ones. visual consistency, the quality of faces, fast-changing tools, editing choices, and creative decisions. For the author, an 18-year-old sitting in a village may soon be able to compete with major studios. That is a powerful vision, but it also raises an important question. If the technical barrier falls, what will still separate a real film from a simple technology demo? Maybe the answer is the same as before. A story, a point of view, an intention. AI can generate images. Cinema still has to create meaning. What if AI was not only threatening jobs, but also accents, expressions, and entire ways of seeing the world? In an article from Radio Canada, the main French language public media outlet in Canada, the focus is on protecting linguistic diversity from large AI models. The article looks in particular at the work of Richard Coury, a professor of computer science and software engineering at Université Laval. Since 2025, he has been developing a language model that is 100% Quebec-based. AI models do not only answer in a language. Little by little, they also help shape that language. When people write with ChatGPT, Gemini, or other tools, they may start to adopt certain phrases, certain words, and certain ways of expressing ideas. And when these models are trained mostly on English data or on standard French, closer to French from France, other forms of French become less visible. Languages that have less content online, including some indigenous languages, become more vulnerable. Some do not have a strong written form. Others have very little digital content. That makes them difficult to include in the industrial logic of AI. Quebec French is a clear example of this problem. Richard Coury explains that current models understand Quebec expressions less well. According to the article, 40% of the models tested simply did not understand them. The danger is very real. To be understood by the machine, users may start using more standard French, then the model reinforces that standard. Slowly, one way of speaking starts to dominate the others. Richard Coury even calls this linguistic colonization by AI. It is a strong phrase, but it points to something precise. A language is not just a communication tool. It carries history, references, social relationships, and collective memory. When a model marginalizes Quebec's swear words, regional accents, or local expressions, it is not only weakening words, it is also weakening what those words say about a culture. The Quebec project described in the article is trying to respond to this dependence. Two paths are being explored: adapting existing models to Quebec French or building a model from scratch. Richard Coury prefers the second option because, in his view, an American model fine-tuned in Quebec French still keeps an American perspective. This issue goes far beyond Quebec. It raises a question of digital sovereignty. Who owns the tools that shape the way we write, speak, and think? If the main AI models are built elsewhere, with different economic and cultural priorities, smaller language communities will either need to build their own infrastructure or accept being treated as exceptions. What if the Slack conversations of a closed company became the fuel for the next generation of AI? In an article from Forbes, we learn about an unexpected new market, selling the digital archives of failed startups to train artificial intelligence models. The main example is Cielo24, a transcription and captioning company. When the company shut down, its CEO, Shanna Johnson, discovered that 13 years of digital traces still had value: Slack messages, Jira tickets, emails, and internal documents. This data was sold as training material for AI for several $100,000. Why are AI labs so interested in this kind of data? Because it shows work as it really happens: imperfect decisions, internal discussions, frustrations, negotiations, and conflicting priorities. To train agents that can operate inside a company, this material is more useful than clean theoretical text. Forbes also describes the rise of reinforcement learning gyms, or RL gyms. These are environments where AI agents learn to act in simulated professional settings. Company archives are becoming a strategic resource for that purpose. But this raises a sensitive question: who has the right to sell these traces? Behind these archives, there are employees, conversations, tensions, and sometimes identifiable information. Even when the data is anonymized, it can still expose people or organizations if it is handled poorly. This story shows that AI is no longer learning only from the public web. It now wants to understand the hidden side of work. And that forces companies to ask a new question. What happens to our internal data when the company disappears? What if AI made you more productive without increasing your salary? In an article from Quartz, the question is simple. When AI improves worker productivity, who gets the gains? The article gives the example of a young lawyer. Thanks to AI, she can work faster on legal research and document review. She produces more. She bills more. But her salary does not necessarily increase. Her bonus may even go down. Quartz explains that the core issue is bargaining power. If an employer can replace part of the work with AI, the worker has less power to negotiate. Daniel Combe, a professor at Columbia Business School, sums up the logic. A young lawyer may bill more but accept a smaller share because AI has become a credible alternative. The article also reminds us that the gap between productivity and pay is not new. According to the Economic Policy Institute, since 1979, productivity has grown much faster than typical worker pay. AI could make this trend stronger because it now affects intellectual tasks, including some of the value linked to skilled jobs. Early research confirms the productivity gains. A 2023 study from MIT and Stanford found a 14% productivity increase inside a large company, especially among less experienced workers, but the study does not say whether those gains led to higher wages. Quartz also points to more subtle forms of lower compensation, smaller benefits, reduced bonuses, and more responsibilities without a pay raise. The former chief economist at Glassdoor calls this workplace shrinkflation. AI raises a question about how value is shared. If workers produce faster but the gains stay with the company, then AI could deepen an old divide between productivity and pay. That wraps up this week's AI Roundup. Julian will be back on Sunday with a new interview in English or in French, and I'll return for the next news digest soon. If you're enjoying the show, those 5-star ratings really help. See you soon.